Hello and welcome to Chapter 16, Final 4. My schedule's been a little switched around this day, so I'm getting this out a little later than normal, so I'm just going to dive right in. So last chapter on Chapter 15, we learned a lot. It was the big chapter. Harold, my husband, he said it's his favorite chapter. It's the chapter. So obviously we're picking up after that, and so this is the next day. If we remember, Jason went to sleep last night feeling a little overwhelmed. We now have the shrine, we had the memorial garden, their sitting room got completely rearranged and is now kind of the backstage area for the whole garden, shrine, memorial thing going on, and everything was still all getting worked out when Jason went to sleep. So this is the next morning. So Chapter 16, Final 4. The next day we met the enemy who had been sabotaging us since we arrived at the gathering. It started out peaceful enough. I woke up and got ready just like normal. My leg was still bruised, a little blue and green, but it wasn't that bad. It looked like the kick had happened 2 weeks ago, not 2 days ago. We had breakfast in our expanded sitting room, and that part was weird. I felt like I was backstage on a Walt Disney World ride. We could see into the memorial of the shrine, but they couldn't see us. The word had certainly gotten out about the shrine. There was a long line of centaur llamas waiting their turn to go inside and be tested. I thought there might be a whole bunch of centaurs with oversized cores, but there wasn't a single one that transitioned while we watched. I attempted to talk to Sandy about my time with Mother Creation, but was still blocked. I'd hoped that now it was just the two of us, I would be able to talk freely. After breakfast, we headed out to the discussions and met up with Amaya and Balaji just like before. The first two discussions were normal. The first speaker said that with all the chatter about new supernaturals, she was instead going to focus on the older ones. She explained that older supernaturals could be the backbone of a house, providing steady guidance and power to those younger than them. Sometimes, though, they lost their way. It seemed like one year they were doing fine, and the next year they started to withdraw. The main cause was usually because they just got bored with everything and either became restless and started causing problems or shut down. That was why it was essential that older mages didn't have the same responsibilities for more than 50 years. They needed change, new ideas, new faces. If things got really bad, there was always the option of sending them to another house for a while or giving them a special quest. The speaker revealed she was over 1,000 years old, and in her lifespan, she noticed that mages had a midlife crisis about every 300 years or so. Mages who lost their interest in life eventually lost their will to live. Even though we were immortal, if we didn't want to live, we didn't. She even had a name for it, the malaise. She'd lost a good friend that way, and that had been her wake-up call that older mages needed support too. The second discussion was light on tips, but the head was a great storyteller and kept us totally entertained. It was the third discussion where things got interesting. My first clue that something was up was when Bermuda became restless. Normally he napped in my lap or stretched out on the couch. He wasn't bothered by other mages and seemed to take any attention that came his way as his rightful due. He was the king, so of course everyone loved him. Today, though, the king was feeling unsettled. He sat on my lap and his tail swished and his eyes were up. Or his tail swished and his ears were up. His eyes up would be interesting. Then he started pacing from my lap to Sandy and back. I looked around, wondering what he was seeing that had got him upset. Was there a bird or a squirrel that had gotten in somehow? I couldn't see anything, although I noticed the room felt a bit different than normal. There were more mages than usual, and yet the room was quieter. The conversation was serious, and I didn't hear any laughter. "What house is this again?" I asked Sandy. "It is House Chihoki," she replied. "Apparently it is near St. Louis. I picked it because it is the only discussion in English during this time slot. Also, I thought it would be nice to hear from a house that is in the Midwest of the U.S. like us. It's actually only about 4 hours away by car." "I thought you picked it because it was one of the houses that hate you," Balaji said conversationally. "Do what?" I guess this was news to Sandy too, as she looked just as surprised as I felt. Not all the houses get along or have the same goals, Balaji continued. I thought you picked this because it's always good to hear what your opponent thinks. My opponent? Sandy echoed. She turned to Amaya, who just sat down beside her after fetching a drink. You think that this house is my enemy? Maybe enemy is a strong word, Amaya said, but I do think this might be the house that is behind the accidents that's happened to you and Jason. She did the air quotes for accidents. There are a few houses that have a unique take on the position we are currently facing. Just wait, you're in for a treat. She said the word treat sarcastically too. At that point, the mages in the room rose to their feet and started clapping. There was usually a few cheerful clappers when the head speaker walked into the room, but it normally wasn't like this. This time they were on their feet, clapping like the president had just walked in. We were sitting down front, right in front of the speaker's circle, and I had a plate of food on my lap, so I clapped politely and waited for him or her to come into view. It felt a bit awkward as our little group was the only ones not on their feet. I guess he'd come in through the main entrance, which was behind us, so I just felt more and more uncomfortable as the clapping went on. I could see the glances of the mages tracking someone behind us, and finally a man stepped around Balaji and onto the speaker's circle. My first impression was that he looked like a cross between Agent Smith from The Matrix and Arnold Schwarzenegger from the original Terminator. He was tall and muscular with slicked black hair. His clothes had a military cut, and somehow he managed to look both like a general and a villain. What really made me sit up and take notice was one of the people that had come in with him. It was Jafar, the guy who'd given me the poison drink. The mages were still standing up, clapping, and General Villain stood there smiling and taking it all in. He must really like the attention because he let it go on for way too long before raising his hand and indicating everyone should sit down. Welcome, friends, he said, looking around with a small smile. Then he made a point of looking at us. Well, most of you anyway. These discussions are open to everyone after all. He had a warm, buttery voice, and it filled the room. He looked like a villain, but he sounded like a movie voiceover guy. He stood at ease, inviting you into his space, yet easily commanded the room. This guy had charisma with a capital C. I welcome this platform today to talk about one of the grave dangers facing our beloved house. This danger is insidious, sneaking into hearts and minds of those who are weak. This danger sneaks in with innocent eyes and sad tales of woe. There are many names for this danger. Sparks, newbies, freshies, but today I call them for what they are, rats. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Rats sulk around in the shadows. Rats eat your food. Rats bring disease. Rats cause rot and famine. And when there is no food, he paused dramatically, the rats eat you. He had the cadence of a preacher in church, and he addressed us like we were his congregation. Some here have opened the door for the rats. They have said, "Oh, you poor thing, come inside where it's warm, eat my food, sleep in my bed, take my money, live in my house." Well, I say, enough of that. We have tales of woe too. We have worked for our food. We have bled for our house. We have earned our bed, and you cannot have it. The crowd roared in approval. We are only as strong as our weakest link. He paused dramatically. Rats make us weak. When you go into battle, who do you want beside you? A rat? One of the mages was so excited he yelled out, "No!" Rats are cowards by nature. Rats will run when the going gets tough. Rats will leave you to fight and die on your own. Do you want to die? No, the crowd echoed back. Rats will take your magic. Magic you have worked for. Magic you have fought for. Do you want to give up your magic? No, the crowd echoed back. The worst part is they don't even value what they've taken because they haven't earned it. They haven't lived like we have. They haven't been cold and had to find shelter. They haven't been poor and tried to find work. They haven't been hungry and gone without. But you have. He paused again, shifting gears. You have grown strong. You have endured. You have stood in battle while others have run. This is what our house is dedicated to. We are dedicated to strength. We are dedicated to power. And when other houses fall, he looked right at Sandy. Ours will stand. Who wants to stand with the strong? He roared. Yes, the crowd roared back, except for that one excited mage who obviously was caught up in emotion and really hadn't been listening. He yelled, "No!" Then looked around in confusion. Who wants to learn the ways of power? He was on a roll. Yes! There was more like that, but I tuned it out at that point. This guy was using a tactic that had worked for thousands of years and was still in use today. Basically, the leader creates an enemy. He finds something that makes a group of people different. Maybe they were a different religion, or skin color, or gender, or maybe they were gay. I've been on the receiving end of this rant before. Once you have an enemy, you tie them to things that have a negative connotation, a rat in this case. Then you transfer all those negative things over to the enemy. In this case, the rat eats your food and sleeps in your bed. It sounds ridiculous when you think about it, but when he was on a roll, it sounded so powerful. The final punch of the speaker's tactic was to make the listeners worthy, make them the hard-working ones, the chosen ones, the ones with the right color or the right religion. They had earned what they had, and the enemy was out to get it. Once the listeners had fallen for the technique, the true masters take it even further, opening it up to include everything. The enemy is after your children, your marriage, your home, your job, your life. It's only natural that you would fight back, right? Warlords have used this technique as a pathway to power. Religious leaders have used this as a pathway to riches. This technique is as old as the hills, and now General Villain was using it to recruit for his house. And more specifically, he was using it to promote himself. The more I listened, the more I realized he wanted mages to follow him personally, like he was a messiah. He wanted them to swear to him and become part of his army. He wanted both power and riches. And if he hadn't been as charismatic, it probably wouldn't have worked. But he had his shtick down. When it got to the time for questions, he was always on script, even if it didn't make sense. For example, rats are weak, so you don't want to ally yourself with a rat. On the other hand, rats are powerful, so they will take your stuff. The rats are coming for you. The crowd was there for the excitement, so they had no problem accepting rats as weak and strong. He held that room in the palm of his hand, orchestrating the mood and tone, except for one time. He was using Sandy and me as his examples for everything wrong with the rats. He didn't address us directly or say our names or anything, but he gestured at us at key moments. When he said rats, he looked at us like, there they are. One time he got a little too excited and he got a little too close. He pointed at me and it sort of looked like he might follow that up with an attack. Bermuda didn't like that. He didn't like that at all. He growled, just like he had when the captain was standing over me. He growled and the whole room shook. He got to his feet, ears back, tail fuzzed, eye of the tiger. He growled again and shook the room even more. Most mages couldn't see Bermuda on the couch, so they had no idea what was going on. But the general could. And General Villain, the guy who stood strong in the face of danger, the guy who was strength and power personified, backed up. He backed the hell up. He recovered quickly, though, and got the audience back again. He made sure to give us more space, though, and he stopped gesturing at us entirely. Sandy took notes the entire time. We kept touching base with each other to make sure the other person was okay. I'd heard it all before, so I wasn't shocked. I was upset and aggravated that people fell for tactics like this, but at the same time, there was no use in trying to change their minds. They wanted to believe in something, and belief is not a rational thing. These were probably good mages who just needed to belong to something. Unfortunately, they'd latched onto something toxic. 1 second. They were probably good mates. Unfortunately, they latched onto something toxic. General Villain was only in this for himself. He wanted followers who would swear to him and boost his power. If they ever stopped serving his interest, he would drop them like a hot coal. Sandy tackled this as a learning experience. She wanted to know how he'd become such an asshole, but of course she couldn't ask him that directly. Instead, she raised her hand and waited patiently as he passed her over in favor of questions from other mages that were clearly his fans. Finally, he took her question, and I could see he was expecting her to be aggressive and come for him. Instead, she asked him about himself. How had he come to be a mage? How had he survived and trained? How had he become the head of household? With each question, his ease with her grew. She was asking him about his favorite person, himself, and he was only too happy to prattle on about his history and his accomplishments. We learned a lot about him. I think we learned a lot more than he really wanted to give away. General Villain started out as an idealistic, young French aristocrat who had ended up on the losing side of a duel. He became a mage, and not long after that, a member of a house. He knew how to read and write, and he was well spoken, so he soon assumed a level of responsibility. It seemed like his responsibilities moved around a lot. Either he wasn't very good at them, or he got bored easily. Somewhere in here, he decided he wanted to be powerful and climb the tournament ladder of success, so he started training with all these famous people. He name dropped like crazy. I didn't know any of these names, and it didn't matter, but it seemed like the other mages in the room did. I kept on listening for what he was learning from these great teachers, but it seemed like he cared more about how well they were known as opposed to what they could teach him. Of course, that was only my perspective. To hear him tell it, he was the hero of every story. He was the champion of every adversity. His only flaw was that he was too perfect, and people resented him for how good he was. Once he reached untold levels of riches and fame at the tournaments, he decided to retire and devote his life to teaching all he knew to newer, impressionable mages. An opening as head of house became available in the U.S., and he campaigned for the position. His platform was that the house was becoming weak, and it needed a place to train powerful fighters. He won over enough of the house leaders and got the job. Flushed with success, he took over the position and then discovered just how much work it was to manage a house. He didn't want to put all that effort in for someone else. He wanted glory. He wanted a lot of people to like him and tell him how awesome he was. Instead of stepping down, he changed the house so it suited him. He built it up to be a training school, not a regular school, and relocated young mages and anyone who didn't like him. Once he got it together, he sat back to bask in all his accomplishments, but those pesky sparks kept showing up at his house and expecting food, shelter, and a place to stay. Frustrated with all that, he decided they were the enemy, and found that some mages were willing to listen to him. He liked talking more than fighting, so he honed his message and delivery until he was the smooth-talking asshole he was today. One thing I didn't get was why he hated younger mages. Sure, he was selfish and self-absorbed, but so are a lot of people. If those were a crime, the jails would be overflowing. Somehow he'd gotten radicalized. This wasn't propaganda to him. He seemed to really believe in what he was saying. He really thought that newt mages were the enemy and responsible for all the problems in the world. This was a piece of his story that was missing. I could feel it. I couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but someone had gotten to him and planted the seeds that had twisted him into the person he was today. Sandy felt the same thing, and she was sure it was right after he became the head of the house. At first, Amaya was worried about us and how we would handle this guy, but in the end, she was the one who became the most angry. She actually ran a successful house, one that was based on kindness and compromise. She cared about the newer mages and the future of the house as a whole. This self-serving general represented the antithesis of everything she'd worked for, and it got her all hot and bothered. We ended up leaving before the general villain finished his talk. If we hadn't, she might have ripped his head off and drop-kicked his body across the room. Balaji dragged her out of the room and kept talking to her in soothing tones. Before we left, I did one last scan. This time I saw the tall woman who'd been playing the part of the genie. I also looked for anyone who might be limping, but couldn't see anyone who fit the bill. I scanned with more than just my eyes. I scanned with my magic sight and saw something that confirmed everything. General Villain had a powerful and distinctive aura, and it was cobalt blue. Amaya was feeling so fired up, she decided to skip the discussions for the rest of the day, so we continued our scheduled events with just Balaji. The discussions were nice and quiet without any further drama, so the time passed quickly. The centaur llamas manning the bars kept us stocked with lots of food and drink. I was still eating an insane amount of food. I guess my body needed all that fuel to work with. The centaurs all knew who I was and were quick to tell me how much they had won or lost on the fight. The ones that had lost didn't seem to hold a grudge and instead seemed to be excited that they had seen the match and been a part of that moment. Of course, the shrine and NL came up too. Going to the shrine was the new must-do thing. They told me they'd heard it was a life-changing, holy experience and they couldn't wait to go. Had I been yet? Even though I was a mage, they were sure I could still get in. They'd heard the memorial meadow alone was enough to make you cry. NL was now famous. She was a hottie, the first mage, and had this whole Cinderella story thing going on. They wanted to know if she was really that beautiful and nice in person, and how did it feel to be around her. Sandy thought it was funny. She said I was now the sidekick in the NL show, and I needed to brush up on my jokes if I was going to keep my job as comedy relief. I was just glad the spotlight wasn't on me as much. I was supposed to be keeping a low profile, but that hadn't worked out too well so far. At least most of the mages at the gathering didn't know who I was, and nobody really knew about my little creations. It seemed like the centaurs knew all about me in the fight, but they didn't really know my role with the shrine and NL. They just knew that NL and CL had broken out of their home to come see us, and so we must be good friends. Sandy thought all that made sense, as a mage had gotten them into this position, and they probably didn't want to focus on the mage that had gotten them out of it. That would make them feel like they were the victims of forces outside of their control. Instead, it was more empowering for them as a people to focus on NL, their first mage, as well as the shrine that might turn any of them into a supernatural. I'm sure General Villain would have been furious at all that lost attention and glory, but I'd seen firsthand what going down that road would do to me. That was a big no thank you. I was quite happy with the few close friends I had. My ego did not have to be constantly stroked and flattered. If there was any stroking going on, it was going to be my hands all over Tyler's fine body. I got lost in that wonderful fantasy until Sandy poked me. "Earth to Jason," she said playfully. "Do what?" I regretfully let Tyler go and returned back to reality. I don't know what got you thinking about Tyler, but it's probably time for us to head back to the suite and get ready for tonight, she said. "How did you know I was thinking about Tyler?" I asked. "You had that goofy grin on your face," Sandy laughed, "and you were practically drooling. The only time you drool is when you think about your man." I opened my mouth to give her a witty retort, then closed it again and just laughed with her. She was right. We said goodbye to Balaji and headed back to our rooms, where we found both CL and NL waiting for us. "CL!" I exclaimed and ran over for a big hug. We had llama hugs and kisses all around. I noticed that I was getting the full frontal on the lips kiss, and Sandy was getting the double cheek kiss like the French do. Was that because she was a woman? "So how is life now?" I asked NL once we settled down. Our cart was full of fresh food, and there wasn't any sort of banquet tonight, so we sat down and had supper together. "It's crazy," she shook her head. "Just crazy. I can't go anywhere without being mobbed by recorders and centaurs. Now, I don't travel anywhere without a group of guards. I've met with our council today, and I'm meeting with them again tomorrow. I've already been on 2 talk shows, and I have more lined up." She looked over at CL, and he leaned over and squeezed her hand in support. "It's been a lot. Only a few days ago I was making clothes and staying home most of the time. I didn't realize how quiet and peaceful my life was." She sighed. Not that I'm complaining, she hastened to add. I'm healthier than I've ever been. I can walk and run now, and I'm alive and free of the wasting. Believe me, I'd pick being alive and a mage any day, but still, it has been a lot of excitement to handle. She looked over at CL. Thank goodness you're here to help with all this. Without you, I'd already have lost my mind. Once we get another mage, some of the excitement will shift over to them, CL said soothingly. You don't have another mage yet? Sandy asked, surprised. Not yet, he shook his head. We've had 3 more centaurs transition, but all of them have been naturals. That's interesting, I said. I wonder what the ratio of mages to naturals was back when the centaurs had magic. The council's been wondering the same thing, NL said. We have almost no records left from that time, so we aren't sure. Most of what we know of our history has been passed down through the stories. So we know we had mages, we just didn't know how many there were. There's a real focus on mages for us, as we live in a house full of mages, not naturals, so being magically represented is important. Also, a mage did this to us, so the hope is that having mages of our own will protect us from this ever happening again. I get that, Sandy nodded. We were hearing about some of the centaurs at the gathering, and we were hearing from some of the centaurs at the gathering, and the focus was very much on you, not CL or MM, but you. NL confirmed that was the direction when the council was going as far as telling their evolving story. She felt like I should be getting all the credit, but I quickly told her I didn't want it. Has anyone reached out to you about training? Sandy asked. Oh yes, NL replied. House ATAC has been very supportive, and I've been getting a lot of congratulatory messages. We are our own nation, however, so setting up training has to go through official channels for now. The Grand Matron is meeting with the council tomorrow to get it all worked out. So how are you doing? I turned to CL. I'm doing great, he said brightly. I have nothing to complain about at all. I'm alive and I feel fantastic. My niece is healthy, and we are going to be able to spend many wonderful years together. He paused for a moment and looked like he was getting choked up. Family is the most important thing to me. We've been through a lot together, and we will have each other. We will always have each other. I'm so grateful, and I could ask for nothing more. Oh, his knees poked him. You old softy, don't start crying on me again. She rolled her eyes at us. He does this in all the interviews and they eat it up. I might be the face of the new supernaturals, but this guy is the heart of us all. She was attempting to sound all cool and street, but when she looked at him there was nothing but love. They were a good family, and they were going to make it through all this excitement just fine. How is MM? I asked. He's doing great, CL said. He's going to be here shortly, and he'll take you to the tournament tonight. His job is to interface with the other centaurs at the event and keep an eye out for any trouble. We do have something to confess. CL looks slightly guilty. We've told the council that you need us in the evenings, as you want to monitor our progress and make sure everything is okay. I looked at Sandy in surprise. That isn't a bad idea, but I'm sure everything will be just fine. You've both had a clean transition, and you're both in really good health right now. I'd double check for you, but I don't anticipate any problems. We don't either, CL admitted. It's just that we talked about it, and we've decided to try and keep life as normal as possible until the gathering is over. Knowing that we can have a quiet moment here at the end of the day is wonderful to look forward to. Well, we are very happy to have you. Sandy quickly assumed the role of gracious host. You are welcome any time. Just make yourself at home. There is one more thing I'm supposed to mention, NL said. The council is hoping you will have an evening to spare from your festivities and join them for a time of celebration. This is a really big deal for our people and deserves a whole week of festivities. However, you are here for your first gathering, which is also a very big deal for a house. So they are just asking for one evening, and it can't be tonight or tomorrow night. They need enough time to put this thing together. Sandy was handling all the planning, so I turned to her. That really only leaves us two possible nights, she said. The night of the concert or the night of the talent show. We can't skip the circle on the final night as that is mandatory. I agree with you that honoring the Centaur Nation and the lifting of the curse is a big deal and deserves its own time. Get back with them about these two possible nights and have them get back in touch with me. We'll work it out. That was the last of the business we had to cover, so for the rest of supper we traded stories and just relaxed together. Sandy was a wonderful host and made them feel welcome and comfortable. MM showed up and joined our little social circle. It was so nice. I could have enjoyed hanging out with our new friends all night, but Sandy got us moving on to our next event. It wasn't anything we needed to dress up for, so I just went with jeans and t-shirts. Before we left, my analytical side pointed out that something didn't seem quite right, so I asked all the centaurs a question. It seems strange to me that there have only been 3 more naturals so far. Based on what I heard about the wasting, there should be lots of centaurs that are ready to transition. I can answer that, MM chimed in. It's because the line is moving too slowly. There hasn't been that many centaurs making it through the shrine. By the time they waited in line to get to the shrine, they went to spend some time inside and check it out. It is really pretty after all. We'll talk to the council and see about speeding it up. Maybe they can post guides that keep the line moving quickly. If someone has a core like NL and it pops, then their magic will dissipate, and there isn't anything the shrine can do for them then. They need to make it a priority that every centaur goes through the shrine at least once. After that, it can be a tourist attraction. NL promised to take care of it, and we headed out. Bermuda had decided he had enough excitement for the day and wanted to get in some beauty sleep. I told him that was totally fine and made him a little nest of pillows and covers on the bed. He settled in and was already sleeping before I could kiss him good night. He looked so freaking cute, I had to kiss him again. We went out the front door and took the mage hallways, so it was all new to MM. He especially loved the hallways with the seaweed and the underwater theme. Sandy and I went at a fast jog, and it felt nice to stretch our legs and move for a bit. MM was used to running much faster, so he had to keep slowing down so we could catch up. The tournament was held 2 floors above ours and over on the other side of the house by the maiden staircase. We decided to go up the manful staircase, though, because Sandy and I wanted to check out the guys. We were on the floor with the merboy, and Sandy thought he was just alright. She was used to John, though, so I'm not sure any of these statues were going to compare to him. I wondered if MM would have any troubles with the stairs. They were made for humans after all, but he didn't miss a beat. So we headed up 1 floor and met a statue that reminded me of Michael B. Jordan, if he had been cast as the Torch in the Fantastic Four. He had flames cupped in his hand and kissed his skin. He was naked, of course, and I don't know if Michael B. looks like that in real life, but he was fine. Oh, one would even say he was hot. Hee hee, get it? Hot. Sandy was used to my humor, so the pun just rolled off of her, but MM groaned. The next level had a Lord of the Harvest type of feel. His hair was stalks of wheat, and he seemed very solid and earthy. He had muscles everywhere, and it looked like he could plow a field on his own. The sculptor done an amazing job, as his face was turned up towards the sun, and you could almost feel him soaking in the warm rays. You know, at first I wasn't sure about this guy, Sandy said thoughtfully, but the more I look at him, the more he grows on me. Then she gave me a sly look to see if I got it. I chuckled in appreciation. She'd set that one up nicely. MM looked blank. Then he got it and groaned again. You two are terrible, he explained, shaking his head. And you're with us all night, I said happily. Your puns are going to kill me, he lamented. Sorry, you're immortal now. Sandy patted him on the shoulder. You're just going to have to grin and bear it. We were on the correct floor now, so we headed to the other side of the house. We had to check out the woman at the maiden staircase, and she had the same theme, Lady of the Harvest. The sculpture had gone with more of a mythical theme for her, and she was surrounded by a whirlwind of seeds and nuts. Her hair wasn't just one type of grass, it was a mixture, and it trailed all down her back. She looked earthly, beautiful, and powerful. I liked it. The entrance to the tournament was right by the maiden staircase, so we walked inside. It was like walking into another world. The light was dim, as the real focus was on the matches. There were 6 spaces, each about half the size of a basketball court, where the fights happened. The floor glowed, and the contestants glowed, and the translucent walls glowed. The whole thing reminded me a bit of Tron. There was a giant leaderboard showing the different divisions and current tournament brackets. It looked like the first division, mages of up to 100 years old, were just finishing up, and Eugene was in the finals. Good for him. The second division, mages up to 200 years old, had started their matches already, and they were about halfway through. The whole thing reminded me of March Madness basketball, where everyone was seated in a bracket, and one loss and you were out. Eugene was in the final 2, but there were 2 other mages that needed to fight before one of them advanced and took him on. They were getting ready to fight in a few minutes, so we decided to hurry there and see the match. The place was huge. It had to be to hold this many fights at once. We were headed to ring number 4, which was in the second row in the back, so we had to run to make it in time. When we got there, the crowd was already pretty big, so we found a good spot along the edge where we could see the contestants. We just arrived when another centaur llama showed up and bowed to us. "Goggles," I said happily. "It's nice to see you again." I gave him a big hug, which he seemed happy to receive. "Hello, young master," he said. "It is wonderful to see you also." Then he paused and looked at me quizzically. "Goggles?" he said. "Oh, sorry," I said. "I don't have a translator, so your name is really hard for me to say. So I nicknamed you Goggles. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all, young master." He seemed really happy about it. To receive a nickname from the mage who has saved our race is a high honor indeed. I will answer to it proudly. "I'm glad you like it," I smiled, and then I introduced him to Sandy and MM. Now that I was looking for it, I noticed that MM seemed very proud of his nickname too. "So what brings you here?" I asked. I happened to hear that your house was headed to the tournaments tonight, and I volunteered myself to be available for all your wagering needs. Plus, excitement seems to follow you wherever you go, and I wanted to see firsthand what mayhem you might get up to. "I'm glad you're here, and I'm sure we will have a good time, but I don't plan on getting into any sort of trouble tonight. We're just here to see some fights, cheer on Eugene, and maybe learn some stuff." I could have said more, but the announcer entered the ring and started introducing the 2 contestants. She wasn't speaking in English, so I had no idea what she was saying, but she gestured towards one corner, and the crowd clapped and cheered. A mage stepped into the ring, and when he did, a red glow settled around his waist. The announcer said some more stuff, gestured to the other corner, and we clapped again as another mage stepped into the ring. The crowd seemed to like this mage a bit more, and a blue glow settled around his waist. "Currently, the blue mage is favored to win this match, but not by much," Goggles chimed in. "All that might change, of course, when the chips are thrown." "What's that?" I asked. "The parameters of the match are chosen before the fight begins," Sandy spoke up. "This adds a nice bit of uncertainty to the match, as both sides attempt to pick the rules that best serve their fighting style. This varies a lot by tournament system, but for the house, the options are weapons, space, and win conditions. Watch, they're getting ready to toss the first chip." The 2 mages had come together in the corner of the ring with the announcer, who was holding a large disc in his hand. He quickly showed it to the crowd and then flipped it into the air. The disc had a hammer on it, with one side red and one side blue. It landed blue side up. The announcer asked a question of the mage, and he replied. A glowing symbol of an empty hand flashed in the air. Before I could ask, Sandy jumped in with an explanation. "The choices for weapons are empty-handed, natural-handed, and charmed weapons. The blue mage won the toss and got to choose. In this case, he chose empty-handed, which means the 2 mages will fight with whatever natural magic and abilities they have. That is the most popular choice at this level of the tournament, and the expected one for this match," Goggles said. "The odds will stay the same for this event so far." What are the other two choices? I asked. Natural weapon is when someone chooses a non-magical weapon to fight with, Sandy said, something like a sword or a staff. This happens a lot when two naturals are fighting, but it's rare that a mage picks this option. Their spells are usually a lot more powerful than a normal weapon. The charmed weapon is just that. The two mages had the option of fighting with whatever magical weapons they have. This option favors wealthy mages or mages that have won lots of tournaments. The quality and capacity of the charm The quality and capacity of the charm will have a big bearing on the outcome of the fight. You won't start seeing this option selected until we get into the older mage brackets. At the Grandmaster level, they fight almost exclusively with charmed weapons, as they want to show off their wealth and power. How do you know so much about all this? I asked. At one time I had dreams of climbing the tournament ladder, she sighed. Now watch, here comes the second chip. This one is the most important. The announcer held a disc with a square on it and flipped it in the air. Again it landed blue side up. The crowd gasped and then started murmuring. The red mage looked pissed as the blue mage said something, and an image of a square with a bunch of red lines in the middle appeared in the air. That will change the odds. Goggles sounded excited. The red mage is very good at distance magic, so he was hoping for an open arena. The blue mage isn't that good at close fighting, but he's ranked higher than the red mage, so this is an advantage for him for sure. So what are the other options? I asked. This was all so new and exciting. I just thought two mages would show up and blast each other. Having a bit of luck and strategy in the match appealed a lot to my analytical side. The options are open, obstacle, and mage, Sandy said. Open spaces favor distance fighters the most. Obstacle spaces kind of look like a paintball course. They have big cones and triangles in the center that provide some cover. A maze favors mages who like to get in close. The walls cut off the distance magic, and it's easy to get trapped in a mage and hammered at close range. The announcer held up a third disc, and this one had an outline of a drop of blood on it. What is that? I asked as he flipped it in the air. It's the win condition, Sandy said, as this time it landed on the red side, and it's the most useless option of the three. The options are first blood, knockout, grudge match, and death. My eyebrows shot up. Death? Really? And before you ask, death is not allowed in house tournaments, she said. First blood is useful for some fighters that have very fast and precise techniques. First blood means just that. Even a drop will do. I've seen mages score a tiny hit that was super fast and very weak, but it was enough to draw blood and they won. The good news for them, if they can pull it off, is they use little magic and they are still fresh for their next fight. Knockout is a normal response, she said, as the symbol for a fist appeared above the red mage. That really means one player is incapacitated or surrenders. The referee can also stop the fight if it looks like one of them can't continue. Grudge match is almost never used, and it means that the referee won't stop the fight until it looks like one of them is in danger of dying. Grudge match means the two fighters hate each other, and it's no hold barred, anything goes, broken bones, smashed faces, loser is a mess type of fight. Both mages had left the announcer and gone back to their corners, where they were talking with their teams. I guess they were firming up last-minute strategy based on the way the chips had fallen. What are the odds now? I asked Goggles. 3-2 in favor of blue, he said promptly, although I would personally score it more like 7-4. Picking the mage should help blue a lot. His close fighting is rated at 13 versus 10 for red. Red had a hard last fight. There's a good chance he has less stamina and less magic capacity than normal. Who a mage has already fought in a tournament can have just as much bearing on the match as who they are fighting now. he settled into a lecturing tone. A mage who's in the third round of a tournament and has had 2 hard bouts already will be favored to lose regardless of who they are up against. A rough match takes a toll on their physical abilities and magic capacity. There is no way a mage can fully charge between bouts, so a big part of getting into the champion circle is winning your matches as quickly as possible. Normally, I recommend betting on a match, as it makes it so much more exciting. Goggles really did love his job. But in this case, I think you should just observe and get a feel for what a tournament round is like. He looked at Sandy and MM. However, there is no reason for either of you to abstain from a fun wager. Sandy just laughed and turned him down. She thought there was no way she was going to waste good pearls on 2 mages she didn't even know. MM turned him down too. He said this was all new to him as well. Goggles didn't have much time to protest as the announcer left and the referee stepped into the ring. He called both contestants to the center and had his talk about having a good match. Then they went to their corners and he called, "Ring up!" A mage stepped forward, knelt down, put his hand on the edge of the ring. The similarity to Tron got even stronger as glowing lines shot out and started forming a cube for the match. The ring was a large square, about half as big as a basketball court, and the lines shot around the floor first. Once they completed their circuit, the lines glowed a bit brighter, or the floor glowed a bit brighter, and the light dimmed out where we were. It was a very effective way to set the focus and let everyone know the match was ready to get started. The lines then grew up the corners and made another square about 12 feet in the air. The cube was set and magical walls of force snapped into place. I hadn't thought about this before, but they would need something to keep all that battle magic from splashing out onto the spectators. Now the cube was up, the lines started forming the maze, and then those walls snapped into place as well. It wasn't a very complicated maze, but the walls were very effective at cutting off all long-distance magic. The walls were mostly transparent though, so you could easily see what was going on. "Fight!" the referee barked, and the match started. I thought both mages would immediately start toward each other, but instead they took a moment to conjure their weapons. The blue mage kept it simple. He went with 2 batons, about 2 foot long, and they formed bright and clear. I thought he was done, but he kept pouring magic into them until they almost looked solid. They didn't look very refined, though. We were at the edge of the crowd, and he was out of the range of my magic sight, so I couldn't be sure, but the batons looked slightly fuzzy. I couldn't see any texture or detail in them at all. They were certainly packed with magic, though, so it might be enough. I personally thought the amount of power he used stuffing into his batons was not good. I knew from working with my little creations that the more detail I added in them, the more power they could hold. Blue's batons had almost no detail, so they shouldn't be able to hold that much power. If I had to guess, he was keeping them together with pure willpower. They were probably leaking magic too. He better hope he won this match quickly, or his magic was going to run out. The red mage, on the other hand, had gone with the spear. This seemed like a curious choice, and it seemed even stranger when it grew an additional hook near the end of it. Unlike the blue mage, his spear looked pretty crisp. The tip of the spear looked sharp, the hook had a serrated edge, and its tip looked sharp too. As soon as Blue finished his weapon, he started winding his way towards his opponent. Blue was taking a lot longer to get his spear ready. Although it looked solid, it didn't have the glow of real power like his opponent's batons. Seeing his opponent was still charging his weapon, Blue picked up the pace and started running through the corridors. Red stayed calm and patient, using every last second to finish getting ready. I guess it really didn't matter where they fought, as they were going to do battle in a corridor of some kind. Blue navigated the maze like a pro, and soon he was running down the last hallway with Red in his sight. Red stayed calm, and at the last possible second, just as Blue was flexing his batons to knock his spear out of the way, a beam of power shot out of Red's spear and blasted Blue backward. It hit hard, as Blue flew all the way back down the hallway and bounced off the back wall. Red roared and charged after him. I was shocked at the turn of events and glanced at Sandy to see her reaction. She was grinning and leaning forward in anticipation. "You gotta watch out for a morphing weapon," she said excitedly. "Sometimes a spear is more like a shotgun." Although Blue had been bounced around a bit, it was his shield that had taken the brunt of the hit, so he was okay. He got to his feet and knocked Red's spear down with one baton as the other one swung in for a hit. Red leaned back and avoided the blow as he flipped his spear around so the hook was pointed up. Then he swung his spear up from the ground and hooked Blue right in the crotch. Blue screamed like he was being gelded as his shield collapsed and the hook sunk home. I winced in sympathy. That was a hell of a hit, and I thought the fight was over. But Blue pulled it together somehow. He got Red away from his family jewels and kept him away as he went into full defensive mode. Blue was in a strange predicament. He needed to play defense, which usually means pulling away from your opponent and giving yourself some room to maneuver. He couldn't do that though, as the shotgun option of the spear would just tear him apart. Plus, the spear had a lot more reach, and Red could attack him with impunity. Instead, he got in close, where he could knock any power blasts away, and the reach of the spear was a liability rather than an asset. Red tried to gain some distance, but Blue stuck to him like glue. Blue's double weapons let him defend very well, and once he got his wits back, he started creating another shield. This one seemed different, so I turned to my resident expert again. "What's up with this new shield?" I asked Sandy. "Does he have 2 shield charms?" "No, you're only allowed 1, she replied. Red's first hits overloaded his shield charm, so what he's doing now is forming a personal shield. It's a good idea if he has the mental ability to do that and fight at the same time. The drawback is his magic is going into 2 places, his weapon and his shield. If he has enough capacity and flow, he will be fine. If not, he's going to have to prioritize one over the other, and that's never good." Red started using his spear like a staff, and the action was fast and furious. He was desperately trying to overwhelm Blue before Blue got his shield together. That didn't happen, and the momentum of the match shifted. Blue stopped defending as much and started attacking. Blue was just flat out better at short-range fighting, and he quickly put Red on the defensive. Blue didn't go for one big hit. Instead, he went for a lot of smaller ones, and he started wearing out Red's shield. Since Red was still on his first shield, I could only assume it was his shield charm doing all the defense. Finally, the inevitable happened, and Red's shield flared and fell apart. He'd been ready for this because he suddenly turned and sprinted towards the empty corridor. Blue sprang after him. He wasn't going to let Red get away, and that's when Red caught him again. He had his spear in one hand, tip pointed behind him, and he blind triggered his shotgun weapon. Blue was so close Red couldn't miss, and once again Blue flew through the air and bounced off the wall. Blue's shield barely held up, and when he got back to his feet, he looked really and truly pissed. Red's weapon was in rough shape though. He'd been blocking with it, and now he just used most of his energy on a weapon and magic on an energy blast. Blue took a second to channel more magic into his batons, which were in good shape to begin with, and then he sprang at Red like a whirlwind. The battle was all but decided at that point. Red had no shield and no time to make a personal one. His weapon was falling apart, and his opponent had both a weapon and a shield. Blue tore into him as Red tried to recharge his spear, but he was too late, and a few hits later, it flickered and went out. "Yield!" Blue demanded, and Red fell to the ground and tapped out. The match was over. The crowd went wild, roaring in approval over a match well fought. I had gotten so caught up in the fight, my heart was racing. I hadn't bet on the match or fought it anyway, but I had so much adrenaline racing through me that I wanted to run around the ring 5 times. "Wow, that was exciting," I exclaimed. "That was a great match," Sadie agreed. "This takes me back to my tournament days. They were good times." "If it is this much fun, why did you stop?" I asked. I could certainly see the appeal now. It would be so easy to get hooked on both watching and fighting in tournaments. I began fighting in real battles, Sandy replied, and the two styles of fighting started clashing. When you're in a real battle, there isn't a nice defined space for the conflict. You might be fighting in a small area or a much bigger one. Battles often involve lots of people, and there's the very real possibility of getting hit by friendly spells. Plus, you might be fighting more than one person at a time. I realized I was being too aggressive in the tournaments and too passive in battle. After all, you can't just tap out of a fight in a real battle. There isn't a referee to stop everything and get you to safety. I could see that. Tyler had basically warned me about the same thing when training in the arena at the beach. In the arena, though, I was always facing multiple opponents with ranged and melee attacks, so that was much closer to a real fight. Still, it was a lot of fun watching two mages go at it. It was even better knowing they wouldn't get killed or even badly hurt. It was just a safe contest of skill and technique. I could relax and enjoy that. And that is the end of our chapter. I hope you really enjoyed it. And next week we have the exciting conclusion of the tournament, top 2. All right, see you then.